on YouTube. There we go. We are now streaming live.
We're live now.
Okay, we will start the meeting now. We've got a couple of people who will hopefully be with us in just a couple of moments. As I said, just to remind everybody, we are streaming live, and to welcome you all here to our meeting of the 19th of January, and we will start, Secretary, with the apologies for today.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Lindsay Barnett, Vanessa Bradley, Peter French, Rod Warsup and Jenny Thorpe.
Okay, thank you. And by the bing bongs, I'm gathering we're still admitting people. So welcome to those who've arrived. Any membership changes since the previous meeting, Secretary?
No, Chair, just to advise that we put out another advert for PVI representatives in the North, which hasn't attracted, unfortunately, any candidates. So we're going to look at other avenues to try and fill that gap, because that's something we absolutely want to do before vesting day. I've also made contact with the association, I can't remember the exact name, but the association that looks after 16 to 19 colleges, with a view to trying to get a nomination from the North as well. So we're actively trying to fill some of the gaps that we've got, but no changes to report at this meeting.
Okay, we've got a couple of members saying that they cannot hear Paul. I can hear you. Are there other people who can't hear Paul? Could you sort of indicate if you can't hear him? Okay.
What I can do, Chair, is for the benefit of those that can hear me, I'll if I leave the meeting and then rejoin from my own device, that might help. It might be an issue with my network. So okay. I'll carry on and I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Okay. Right then, while the Secretary is not in the meeting, can I just check if there are any declarations of interest outside those which have already been announced? If you could use your reactions button, and if you use, there are no reactions button. If you use the thumbs up just to let me know if there are any changes to your usual or to anything that you have previously declared, and I'll just have a look through and check. Okay, thank you. So I don't see there any changes. Paul, do we have you back? Not yet. We will well, we will carry on because I can fill him in on what he's missed by the time he comes back. So if we could just, I'm hoping you all have a copy of the minutes from the previous meeting, or that you have indeed read them and are therefore able to indicate to me that you agree with those as the minutes of the meeting of the 15th of December, which actually isn't that long ago. So if I'm just looking through here now, I have the minutes, and I'm looking at page 1, which is attendance. I'll let Paul back in. Paul, are you back with us? Have we got Paul back?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everyone hear Paul now? Brilliant. Excellent. That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, so Paul, we just went through, there were no additional interests to declare from any of the members of Forum. And we were just looking at the minutes of the meeting of the 15th of December. Would it be possible for you to share those so we could just run through them?
I'm going to have to ask Beth to do that, as I'm on my own computer now. I don't have them open on my own device, unfortunately.
Right, only the host. Am I the host as well?
Actually, what if you bear with me for 1 second, I might be able to.
I've got them open.
Yeah, Beth's managed to do it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Beth. Okay, so just looking at the minutes then, if you can scroll down for me, Beth, because I do get into this habit of trying to scroll down when I'm in Zoom, when it's someone else's document. Just looking through, therefore, we're on to, believe that's page 3. if you can just unmute yourself and say or write something in the chat if there is anything that you want to add to the minutes, because it's quite a complex way of doing it. So Beth, if you can continue to scroll down through section 3, then on to section 4, page 3. As I say, if there are any comments, if you could put them in the chat, that would be really helpful. Moving on to page 4, Beth. We talked about the growth fund, budgets. If you can keep scrolling, the high needs update. Moving forward onto the next page. We then looked at, yeah, that was the high needs. We then moved on to the schools budgets and the consultation proposal. We then moved on to the combined budgets annual report. And then further down, then we looked at the central school services block and budgets. Thank you, Beth. Moving down. And then the votes that were taken onto the risk register. And then moving further down, Beth. No urgent business, and that was the end of the meeting. So from that, has anyone got any amendments or matters of factual accuracy that they would need to propose to the minutes? Okay, then we'll take those as a true and accurate record of the meeting of the 15th of December. Thank you very much, Secretary. Okay, so moving on, just in terms of officer feedback, for most of the items, there was no officer feedback, and for those where officer feedback was proposed, then those are items on the agenda today. So nothing to pick up there, because we will be talking about them during the meeting. Thank you very much, Beth. Okay, so can I just ask Forum therefore to approve the minutes of the previous meeting? All those in favour, can you please give me a little thumbs up from your either physically or from your reactions button? Thank you very much. I'll take it that those are agreed by Forum based upon the number of thumbs I can see there. Okay, and the lack of any comment in the chat box. Okay, so first main item on the agenda, and I believe we've now got Kathy and Emily back from her her power cut. So if we've got a local government review and children's trust update and the draft budget proposal. So that's Kathy and Emily.
Yes, before I start, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes,
yeah.
we can.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm just going to give a verbal update then on the draft budgets proposed for the two new unitary authorities, headlines on the aggregation of the district and borough budgets, the disaggregation of the council budget, and then also just key headlines in terms of the children's services budget and obviously the Northamptonshire Children's Trust as well. So in terms of the draft budgets, obviously it's the first ever draft budget for Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire new unitary authorities. The draft budgets were published for the North on the 7th of December of 2020 and for the West on the 5th of January 2021. So obviously they're open for consultation at the moment. The final budgets are currently being worked on and will be presented at the respective North and West Shadow committees in February. So obviously it's been quite challenging pulling the budgets together, particularly against the backdrop of COVID. and the sort of internal huge sort of transformation programmes within the councils, including the Northamptonshire Children's Trust and the repatriation of LGSS as well to the respective authorities. It's included collaboration across the county and district and borough councils, and it's been done through a number of task and finish groups and overview and scrutiny, which has been led by members. So all of the papers for the two draft budgets for North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire are published on CMIS. I can circulate the links afterwards if that would be helpful. So just to give some key headlines then in terms of the draft budgets. So in terms of the West Unitary Authority, it's produced a fully balanced budget for 21-22. The North Northamptonshire Unitary budget, there was a gap at the time of publishing, but the publication of the draft budget was prior to the government funding announcements. So obviously further work was being done to close that gap, and there was an expectation of additional funding to come through the funding announcements. The budgets have been set with contingencies for the ongoing impact of COVID and addresses the ongoing issues and opportunities that have arisen during this financial year. So obviously it's been quite a complex exercise this year, more complex than usual. So it's included the aggregation of the district and borough council budgets and the disaggregation of the county council budget, which obviously makes up the lion's share of it. So the disaggregation of the county budget has been done based on a set of disaggregation principles. So largely looking at things like geographic location, looking at things like road length, for instance, for highways, looking at originating postcodes, for example, for adult social care and children's social care. So there's a number of principles, obviously, that have gone into disaggregating the budget. We've arrived at, obviously, a position for North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. So just to give an idea of the scale, the total net budgets for the two new authorities is just over 600 million, and that includes the dedicated schools grant. Of that budget, about 130 million relates to children's services, and that will include the services that remain out of scope of the Children's Trust, and they'll be split across the two new unitaries, and it obviously includes the Northamptonshire Children's Trust as well, which will be made up of social care services and early help and prevention. So obviously it's quite a sizable chunk of the total budget for children's, around 20% of the budgets for the two new unitaries. So on to the children's budgets specifically. Obviously you touched on the Children's Trust, who will be delivering social care and early help services on behalf of the two new unitaries. The total contract sum across the two unitaries is 136 million, but after taking into account grant income and other income, the net cost to the councils is 123 million. So the contract sum's been arrived at by basically taking the existing service budgets, building on top of that the additional costs of running a children's trust, because obviously there are some diseconomies of scale there. And then there's also some other agreements around the provision of support services and around the provision of property as well, which the trust will be buying back from the two new councils. So again, we've looked at disaggregating the total contract sum between North and West, and the split is approximately 45% of the total contract sum to the North and 55% to the West. So there's a whole governance process that's built around the contract. And I don't know sort of whether Kathy wants to talk a bit about that. But the sort of financials will be managed through a finance mechanism, and it will sort of link into the council and the governance process there. Obviously, the children's services budget that remains out of scope again has been disaggregated between North and West, and the total of that budget is just under 10 million, which relates to the council contribution to those budgets. The budgets have been built sort of to include the impact of contractual inflation, demographic growth allowances, and also to allow for the ongoing impact of COVID into next financial year as well. And also,
Emily, could I just ask a couple of questions?
Yes, sure.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I need to take you back quite a bit, because I'd got a question about, you said at the beginning that it wasn't possible to set the North budget because there wasn't enough, basically.
But yeah, so at the time of publishing the Northamptonshire budget, they published with a gap to close of, I think it was in the region of 10 million. But obviously at the time of publishing the budget, it was before the government funding announcements, which I think have been more favourable than anticipated.
So was it more favourable for both North and West, which means that the West therefore has a surplus, or how has that worked?
No, so I think because the West held off publishing until they received the settlement, basically I think they've just been able to go taking into account the other factors. They've been able to go in and publish a balanced budget. Obviously, work continues to go on in both the North and the West, because financial implications are constantly changing around COVID, which is obviously difficult to forecast, and additional savings and opportunities being carried forward from this financial year as well being identified to carry forwards.
So those concerns about the North, which it came through that there was enough money, because that's not an ongoing issue. Will we be faced with the same picture next year?
Yeah, so obviously the local authorities get a sort of funding formula similar to DSG from central government, and then obviously they'll be looking at bridging the gap through council tax and other income, and obviously then savings and efficiencies across the piece as well.
So that's more of an issue for the North than it is for the West?
It was at the time of publishing the draft budget.
So my question is that likely to be the same situation next year?
In the medium term at the moment, there is a gap across North and West to bridge for future years. It's not unlike previous budget cycles for the council, obviously with increasing demand pressures against sort of the sort of central government funding cuts as well. But I think going forwards, obviously added into that mix the impact of COVID, which is obviously uncertain, then potentially going forwards it's going to continue to be challenging, obviously as it has been for the past.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about the trust then as well? You were talking about 20% of the funding from the two unitaries going towards the Children's Trust, is that right?
Children's services in total makes up about 20% of the overall, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that enough to improve the service?
Might have to defer to Kathy on this one. Obviously, the budget has been formed of the existing council budgets. So the current financial performance for this financial year for the children's service, obviously it's been live since the 1st of November, and prior to that it would have formed part of the county council. The financial performance year to date has been quite favourable for children's social care, So I think at the moment it's felt that the budget that the trust has been given to operate for next financial year, which is sort of the period of the first setting of the contract sum, as it were, will be sufficient to meet service delivery next financial year.
We'll pass that hot potato into Kathy's hands.
Sorry, Kathy.
Right, sorry, Emily, for interrupting you.
No, that's fine.
Did you want me to come in, Joanne?
Well, I was going to say, Emily, was there anything else
sorry.
you wanted to tell us about the budgets?
There's probably not, actually. That probably wraps it up. I was just going to open it up to questions, but I think there might be an issue with Kathy's sound as well. I don't know if she's trying to.
Can you not hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions, anyone for Emily, in regard to the aspects that she has talked about? Sorry for me, I've got my questions, and when you've got those questions in your head. And
I know, that's fine.
Answers. Okay. Thank you very much, Emily. Kathy, do you want to pick up from there?
Yes, absolutely. Just to state that the trust's contract with the trust, it went live on the 1st of November, as Emily said, and so the budget for the trust has actually been set for the next 17 months. And as Emily says, it has been set so it is deemed appropriate, and as Emily says, the current performance is very good. I can see somebody can't hear me.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure. I did have problems like this last night.
Can those who can't hear Kathy indicate if you can't hear her? Right, seems to be the same people who couldn't hear Paul earlier. That's interesting. Okay, Kim can't hear, Karen, John. Okay, it seems like it's only me that can hear you. Right.
I mean, the other way, Joanne, yeah, I think there were some issues with Zoom. This happened last night. Okay. I could give a short feedback and then provide a statement if required.
Well, I think if everybody can hear me, if you do some short feedback, and then for those who can't hear you, I'll try and summarise.
Okay. So the budget has been set for 17 months, and as Emily said, we consider that it is actually sufficient. The trust, as it's a contract, there are key performance indicators that we will be managing the contract with the trust. So there is clear service delivery items in that key performance, and also financial delivery. And they are managed through an operation board and a strategic board on a monthly basis for the operation board, and then a quarterly basis for the strategic board. This also manages any support services. If there is a requirement for the trust, because obviously there is a demand-led service, there is the opportunity for them to put a business case forward through the contract if there is a need to increase. And so if you take the example of COVID, nobody could have foreseen that. There is also the opportunity for the trust to seek investor save opportunities. And so the short answer in effect is yes, the trust should have enough money to improve. However, there are other ways of looking at their financial compatibility in terms of what they're doing, but also what they might do going forward.
Thank you. I'll just do a very, very quick, sorry to say it again, but for those who've already heard it, but I'll just try and do a quick summary there for those who couldn't hear, because I'm assuming everyone can hear me. So Kathy's answer there, thank you very much, Kathy, was basically that there should be enough money, because I'll just let Muriel back in, that there should be enough money. There's a 17-month contract, so obviously the trust runs under a contract, and Kathy's going to shout at me if I've got this wrong. There's a contract at the moment. It's a 17-month because of the timetable of moving over, which was November. Clear KPIs which have been set, which are being monitored for KPIs for service delivery, which are being monitored on a monthly basis by an operational board and then 4 times a year by a strategic board. And there's a business case opportunity to request additional funding if needed because of circumstances changing. However, the belief is that there should be enough funding and enough structural change and reform, I would add that in terms of to ensure that the service delivery contract can be met successfully for the children and families of our county. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions, colleague? Sorry, budget set for 17 months. The contract is 5 years. Sorry. Yeah. Any questions on that? Thank you very much. I know it's something that we are all looking, I know it's been in place now for a couple of months, but it's something that we are really all looking forward to the success of the Children's Trust for our children and families across the county. So thank you very much, colleagues. Okay, if there are no further questions on that, then we will move on to Beth, who's going to talk to us about the DSG budgets and the 2020-21 DSG budgets and the monitoring. Beth, over to you.
Thanks, Jo. Can everybody hear me? Because I can swap to my mobile phone if we've got the same problem. All looks okay. Thank you.
No, Pat can't hear you.
Pat can't.
It's the same.
Okay, I'm going to swap over to talking on my phone but presenting the paper on my desktop.
Okay.
Is this through my mobile phone? Oh,
I'm not sure that will work, Beth. We've got a terrible.
Right, how am I going to do this? Can somebody else put the paper up?
I think, Beth, you need to mute yourself.
Paul, would you be able to put
mute yourself on your laptop, speak into your phone?
That's how the way around I had it, but I still got the feedback somehow.
Beth, if you've got sound streaming from both of them, that's probably what's causing the feedback loop.
I didn't.
Okay.
I think that's resolved it for me, Beth. It's better now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Beth, you're talking to a paper anyway, so there's something on the screen, isn't there?
Do you want me to share the paper, Beth?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think that might work if I turn it off.
I've only got them in PDF form, so let me just open that one.
Am I still getting feedback?
Yeah.
I can't seem to talk on my mobile phone without getting that feedback, even if I turn everything off on the laptop.
Okay, well, we've got words at least to go with it this time, so we can read as well as listen.
Okay, I'll just read off the slides mainly anyway.
Yeah.
So the schools forum are asked to note the forecast outturn position, so it's just for information. This is an indicative view based to the data up to the end of December. The DSG forecast outturn position overall is a 4 million overspend against the budget of 233 million, which is 1.7% predicted overspend. That's mainly due to the high needs block pressures that we've discussed at all of the schools forum meetings so far this year. 4.3 million relates to the increased number and cost of out of counter placement. Hang on a moment, sorry. Hugo, can you stop hitting the wall, please? So it's mainly due to out of county placements, 3.7 million overspend, the increased special school demands of 200,000, an overspend of 1 million on mainstream provision, and 200,000 overspend on alternative provisions, which are partly offset by an underspend of 800,000 on 7-unit provision. Next slide, please. So the forecast deficit is 4 million, but the underspend on schools block of 0.3 million relates to de-delegated funds, which are earmarked would need to carry them forward. So we have to find a way to fund the full 4.3 million deficit on the high needs block. That's largely covered from a planned contribution of 3.75 million in the 21-22 DSG budget, obviously split by North and by West. This is looking at it on combined totals, but further down we'll look at it on a split basis in the next agenda item. The announcements for 21-22 budget included a 10.57 million increase on the high needs block. So that's where 3.75 million will come from to reduce obviously the available funding for growth in 21-22. The in-year deficit's temporarily financed at the sort of the end of the year in terms of cash flow. It's temporarily financed through balances which have been earmarked for carry forward for the mainstream maintained schools, own balances, de-delegated funds for redundancy costs, trade union and the school improvement support, and also largely the Waldale PFI reserve. So the overall position is resulting in a 1.3 million surplus as set out in table 1. If you could scroll down to that table, please, Paul. So this table is showing the gross expenditure budget without netting off recoupment in the first column for each of the 4 blocks. And on the right-hand column, it's showing the overall underspend expected on the schools block of 323,000, a break-even position expected for the early years block, a high needs block overspend of 4.3 million, coming down to the total overspend 3.994 million rounded up. The carried forward balances have to remain the 323,000. We've put in there the expected use of the growth fund underspend from 1920 and the recruitment refund that we've been carrying. And the Waldale PFI reserve nets off to a balanced position of 1.3 surplus. Next slide, please, Paul. I previously reported to Schools Forum in December that all local authorities that have a cumulative DSG deficit of 1% or more at the end of a financial year are required to submit a recovery plan to the DfE, outlining how they'll bring their deficit back into balance. Muriel, fortunately, was at that meeting, and she's come back to me to correct me to say that that position has changed now, and that any overall deficit on the DSG needs to have recovery plans in place, which naturally we do and we would have, but that we can expect to be asked by the Department for Education to provide that recovery plan at any point in time. So that 1% level is gone now. Any DSG deficit has to be ready to be presented in terms of a recovery plan to the government. So we're not in that position at the end of 2021. We don't think we'll be at that position, but that is possibly going to be different at the end of 21-22 when we split into North and West, because the PFI reserves sit in the West. So there won't be that natural large reserve in the North that's normally there to offset any overspend. Next slide, please. I've put the extract of the guidance there. I don't think I need to go through it. It's really just for information if anybody wants to see the details of how that's changed from the 1% requirement previously. So next slide, please. So going through each block in slightly more detail, we've got the forecast underspend on the de-delegations predicted, and there are also within the rates budgets, sometimes we have a small surplus, sometimes we have a small overspend, depending on how the VOA, the Valuation Office, revaluations that happen during the year might fall. That's just put in there to note that it might be slightly up or slightly down. Next slide, please. Muriel's back in. The high needs block, the current forecast is 4.3 million, so that's just providing a little bit more of a breakdown there. And the usual, this is a slide that sort of reappears each time we do the monitoring, just to point out the relationship between the budgets that where we have special schools that are full, that quite often the knock-on effect of that is that we have to use what we term as out of county, which can be within Northamptonshire, but independent special schools or other independent placements. Next slide, please. So the early years block, current forecast is a nil variance to budget. Financial and geographical modelling of the impact of COVID-19 and funding changes will be discussed later. The next slide, please. So in summary, the schools block, small underspends forecast, largely relating to dedelegations. The high needs block, as discussed, 4.4 million forecast in December. And final outturn, predicted overspend as per January 2021. An early years block break even. Thank you. I think that's the last slide.
It is.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Okay. Any questions on the monitoring, therefore, that Beth has just presented? I think it probably sits very much alongside, in a sense, what Gwen's about to talk to us about in terms of high needs update, in terms of what the implications are for all of us moving forward. So, Kath, I'm sorry you didn't hear that. It was very much what was on the slide. So in terms of now, if anybody has any questions related to what they read on the slides there, I think that the key points there were that the DSG overspend is in the high needs area, and in terms of the monitoring showing that the other areas are likely to be on track to meet their budget, but the overspend relates to the high needs, which I think therefore brings us very nicely onto Gwyn and to your update, and I think that will prompt some discussion as well and some
Chair, can I just ask a question, if that's okay?
Yes, of course, Rob.
Beth, you talked about the potential moving forward of the implications for Northamptonshire North with this sort of deficit, particularly because it doesn't have the PFI reserves. Can you just outline what you think those implications are?
I think really it's just that we'll have to present more of a formal recovery plan to government. We'll be doing that kind of recovery plan to move away from a deficit position and to address the high needs overspend, which Gwyn is constantly working on and reporting on to you. So I don't think we'll be actually operationally doing anything different, but there might be a more reported and a formal position we have to take to government.
So I'm still not clear though. What's the difference? What difference does the PFI reserve make? Just so I'm clear on that.
So it's really looking at the position, the overall DSG balance at the end of the year. So what's on the balance sheet for DSG? Is it a deficit overall, or is it a surplus? And because we have a large PFI, it sort of masked the deficit. Hasn't masked it, it's netted off the deficit. So there hasn't been, under the previous requirement to submit a recovery plan when the deficit was greater than 1%, we've never hit that because we've always been in a surplus because of the reserve. But that reserve is
what
now,
you're saying is now that the West will not probably be in that technical position because they have the PFI contract is in the West, but the North will lose that cushion, and therefore the North will be in very much of a position about having to face a formal recovery plan.
I think so. I'm not sure if Muriel's still on the line, whether she's able to comment, if I've got that right.
I'm just checking to see if I can see Muriel still with us.
Muriel's our representative from the Education, Schools and Funding Agency.
I can't see Muriel still with us, so when she pops back in again, because she does pop back in again every so often, we can perhaps pick that up with her. Rob, does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, it does. I don't, you know, you'd rather be in a position where you haven't got something that's masking another position. And although I'm going to be part of the North, if I was part of the West, I would be a little bit concerned about that PFI reserve masking a potential position is a financial risk. But no, but that was my question answered. So thank you.
And I think that for the North, then there's a considerable position, because we will be in that formal, highly likely to be in that formal recovery plan position of, and then looking at what the solutions to that deficit are, that we will have to look at from the perspective of the North of the county, which the West, as you say, Robert, is masked by the fact that they don't technically have to look at it yet, but probably ought to be looking at it because it's a long-term risk.
Yeah, that's what I was going to just mention, just to test my understanding on that, is despite the PFI surplus sitting with the West, it's an equally pressing issue in reality for both West and
in
North.
reality, but technically it can be knitted off by the PFI funding.
Yeah.
So
it's only when one amalgamates the budgets that I guess is offset.
Sharon, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think, as James has said, the issue is the same in the West, it's just masked, and the conversations that we've had as a feature of Schools Forum is that we absolutely need to look at the high needs cost budget and the placements that are out of county. We need to look at the sufficiency and capacity in the special schools network, but we also need to look at what we need to change in the mainstream education services and organisations, so that we keep children in those mainstream provisions where we can. The fact of the matter is the available resource is the available resource, demand is increasing, and we need to start that early prevention type agenda, focus on high cost packages and what can we learn from that and change the system. So it's absolutely going to be a priority for the North and the West. And I don't know if Kathy wants to add anything else, but it certainly will be on the strategic agenda for the new unitaries, because we need to, and that's no different actually from many of the local authorities up and down the country, but we have the new landscape of the budget disaggregating, so we need to really focus on a strategy to manage and support that cost. I don't know if Kathy wants to add anything else.
I've just got a question from Sandra. Sandra, do you want to unmute and ask us your question?
Yeah, sure. I think we're almost covering it off, actually. I have a question around the DFE and their kind of consideration, or, you know, to support there being now two unitary, authorities and the complexities around that. So whilst we have to align with, the blanket rules, if you like, around deficit budgets, has the question been asked of the DFE and anywhere else where there could be additional support, I'm thinking, rather than a fix, potentially?
Could I just add a question to Sandra's question? How do we know how many local authorities nationally are having to submit deficit recovery plans?
I don't have that figure, but it'd be interesting. I can ask Muriel for it. If we haven't got Muriel back in, I'll send her an email and ask the question.
Because following on from what Sandra says, is it that if there are, more than half of the local authorities are having to submit deficit recovery plans, and it is likely that many of them are having to do that because of issues related to their high needs budget, then one would think that someone might be looking at this, but that would be a question to know if we are along the lines of lots of other local authorities, or is this just happening to us? And is the West just lucky at the moment that its deficit is masked by the PFI money, whereas actually we both probably should be looking at both sides should be looking at the deficit, but do we also fit in with local authorities on a general level in this country, and are we mirroring that picture, or are we an outlier? I would think we're probably mirroring the general picture rather than being an outlier, but Sharon, you...
Yeah, I might bring Gwyn in a moment. So I know anecdotally that the many local authorities have had pressure long before now, and in Northamptonshire we've done very well actually at managing the pressure within high needs budget. I don't know the exact figures, but I'm hoping that Gwyn will be able to come in on that because she works with regional colleagues. So it is a national issue. Furthermore, there is a review, as you're probably aware of the SEND system nationally because of the pressures in that. But I'll pass over to Gwyn if you want to add any more sort of regional context, Gwyn, from the conversations you have with your peer colleagues.
Well, shall we move on to the next agenda item, which is the high needs update, and then Gwyn's going to talk through that with us. So we will move on to the next item, and Gwyn, if you can take us through that, and then if people have questions. Oh, Rob just has a question about when the recovery plan needs to be brought back to Schools Forum and to be submitted to the DFE.
Because we're not in an overspent position at the end of 2021, we don't have to bring one to Schools Forum at any point in time coming up, but we'd like to, depending on obviously work we have to do for disaggregation. Our aim would be to bring the beginnings of that to Schools Forum in July. I think obviously after post-vesting day, it's hard to say exactly what the two Schools Forums will want on their agendas, but that would be my aim. I don't know if Gwyn has a comment to make on that.
No, I think that's fine. I mean, just to talk about this bit in particular, I mean, I think it's about good budget management, isn't it? And I think we can assure you that the local authority for both of the unitaries will be looking at the high needs budget and trying to keep that within its budget. It's not about, it doesn't matter whether there's something that might offset it in, you know, in the overall DSG budget. As a high needs funding budget, we need to try and manage that as best we can, given the pressures and the fact it's needs led. So I think that will continue. And I do think that in the West, we will continue to have discussions at those forums, and the actual high needs pressures will be reviewed every Schools Forum. And so I would hope those discussions of how we can mitigate any potential overspends on that aspect of DSG would be discussed then. And I think, you know, if the high needs funding bit is sitting at an overspend, then they should look at an internal sort of a local recovery plan rather than having necessarily to report it to DFE, because that's all about good budget management. I think it's not about reporting to DFE. We need to obviously try and avoid that situation and manage it locally, whichever unitary we're in. So I think we would take it like that. And absolutely, high needs funding overspent budgets is absolutely the norm these days, rather than anything else. Now, I don't know, because I haven't investigated all Schools Forums output, so I don't know how much of that is offset by PFI and other authorities. But high needs funding as being an overspent part of the DSG budget is now more a norm than otherwise. DFE is well aware of that. That was formed part of the National Audit Office report last year, and so absolutely forms part of the drive for the SEND review to see how the system can be better managed in order to try and reduce that sort of pressure. So, and we live in hope.
Okay, Gwyn, do you want to do your presentation? Because you've got some slides, haven't you?
It's actually a double act that we're doing.
Yeah, the slides are best.
Between the two of you. So if you do your double act, and then we continue to think about our questions. We'll listen to you, and then we'll see what we have to say at the end. Okay.
I've got an Excel spreadsheet.
So if you do your double act, and then we I think there might be a delay on the YouTube, because that's me. Think about our questions, we'll listen to you, and then we'll...
Does this put us in an endless loop?
I think it might.
I think you just need everyone to mute and then it would be okay, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, please, could you put the Excel spreadsheet up for the next agenda item? It's going to be very tiny on my phone, I think.
We're not having a very good day technology-wise. I think after all this time of remote meetings, we would have ironed out all of the issues. I'm just opening it up now.
Thank you.
Just while you Paul has a comment about Milton Keynes being able to manage their budget within their budget, and he's just asking if that's the case.
Sorry,
Yes, sorry, I don't know Milton Keynes detail. They're not in our region, so it's not one that I actually talk to regularly. So, but you know, all of this is published as our information is published, so we are able to find out. It's having the
Yeah. Okay, Gwyn and Beth, off you go.
Sorry, before they do, Raj, I had to leave and rejoin. Can you make me a co-host so I can share the slides, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll make you a co-host now.
Thanks, Raj.
Yep, you should have screen sharing now.
So it's the Excel document for this one.
There you go.
Oh, I can't see that, it's tiny. Excuse me squinting at it. So what this is showing is the overall sort of budget that we've had for 2021. We've built the growth in the second column into the various budget lines for high needs. So that's a mixture of the growth that we've seen in 2021 that's unavoidable. Those children are the new children, new pupils in places largely from September. So we know that they're remaining there, that increase will be there for the following year. And there's also built in for inflation, recognising that the teachers' pension and pay grants are now in these budgets rather than a separate grant. And also in inflation in costs where we know that's coming in, and also trying to build in, where possible, adequate growth to try and follow what we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years in high needs. But that's where we come, really there we're using sort of what's left, because there isn't possibly adequate to cover all the growth. And it's, having said that, it's looking pretty balanced, it's looking pretty good. Compared to where I thought we'd be, and to the far right with the orange headed columns, this is the split into north and west. We're bringing this to you largely for information. There's still a bit of work ongoing at the funding of it below, so the rows below showing the detail of how we're funding this. In particular, the sort of the distribution of the underspend on the growth fund and how that will be used to balance. And there's an interplay with the way that alternative provisions being provided across north and west, because their base is in the west. For hospital and outreach, the funding will go to the west, but is a west and north service. And whereas other alternative providers, the funding will be split and will go to north in the DSG and west in the DSG, and there'll need to be a consideration of how that payment gets to the alternative providers, when the recoupment will come entirely from where the alternative provider is based. So it's quite a complex picture, a bit of a Mensa puzzle to try and work out. But so far we've got a balanced position by using, if you look at the bottom line, you see we've got in there the prior deficit repayment. So that's the 2021 expected deficit contribution towards that from the 21-22 budget of 3.745 million, being split across north and west based on population characteristics in the main, and a small part historical basis of funding, which is how the funding has come to us from government. So taking you further down there, we've got the percentage splits all the way down on the right hand side. So this is the disaggregation work that we've been doing. And you can see the funding basis there with the high needs education and the proposed transfer to early years, which we'll bring to you later for a vote, which will be a schools forum vote, which we'll bring to you in March now, I believe. And proposed a small transfer this year from the Central School Services block and the earmarked contribution to high needs underspend from the growth fund, which we've carried forward. So happy to take any questions, and also Gwyn is obviously better placed to answer the detailed questions on the individual budget lines.
Any questions on the individual budget lines? I can't see you all, so if you do have a question, please put it in the chat, and then we can, there we go. Any questions on those individual budget lines there? I think one of the things is when we're looking at this, the overspend on high needs, is that it's all of us that are overspending on high needs. I think that's a really key point to make, that the high needs budget is all of us. It is not some special schools over there or this there. It's a collective responsibility, because actually the children are all ours. And so the overspend there is, I can see a question about a year-on-year increase on out of county, in the sense that at some point that things have got to the point, Gwyn, I do believe, where out of county is our option, and then when parents appeal, because that is their right to appeal, that the system has escalated so much that is where the very high costs come from. And I do believe that it's about us looking at how we all can stop things getting to the point where we're having to spend so much on the very high placement costs for out of county. And that is about the plan that needs to be put together with all of us involved, about how we address these issues at a much earlier stage before they get to that point. And I would hope we'd all be agreed on that. The more that we can address these issues for pupils and put things into place at a lower level, then they won't get to the point where we're having to spend so much money on out of county. Would that be fair, Gwyn?
It is. I mean, obviously it's, well, as you've muted, it's a very complicated issue, but the pressure on the system, as in entry into the system, is not getting any easier. Just as an illustration, since the return of schools in September, and given all the complexity of the time, but we were averaging 30 new requests for a statutory assessment a week. In December, that jumped to 45 a week. And, I think, there's some big questions about the why of that. And indeed, there's been a lot more turn downs of the assessments because the reasons for the assessment aren't believed to meet thresholds. So it's looking at why we've still got the driver at that bottom end, and how we can support early identification and intervention and support to schools to do that effectively. But we are full within the, nearly full within the special system, though we are increasing unit provision where we can, though there's been some delay on that because of the capital works needed to be done. But so we are increasing our capacity locally, but when that does end up as being fairly full, or parental choices that they want to go to out of county, they obviously, once they're in a statutory system, they have rights of appeal. And I'd much rather that we didn't get into that stage, so we could meet the needs of the young people at the earliest possible opportunity, which normally means that, over time that would be the cheaper option too. But it's not all about money, absolutely, but it is about trying to meet the needs as early as possible and meeting them effectively to avoid escalation where possible.
Kath is just asking me to sort of, or someone to sort of go over what you've said. I think, Kath, basically the point is we need to be looking at stopping cases getting to the very high level by really looking at what we do earlier on, supporting children, sharing expertise, having the right resource in the right place. And that's a massive issue, and nobody's saying that's an easy ask of all of us. But I do believe that if the money isn't going to be forthcoming from the government, which at the moment it isn't, and there's no point all sitting here hoping that at some point that money is going to come to us. We have to take some proactive steps to have a look at what we are doing, how we are doing it, and how we can circumvent some of that that escalation that leads to the very high costs that end up by being in the statutory system. Sandra has asked, the percentage difference between North and West from growth funding seems to be a big difference from other funded areas. Can you explain the difference there, why there's a difference?
Yes, this is largely happening because there's an import and export adjustment for places funding on everything except for alternative provision. So alternative provision includes hospital and outreach education funding. And if you look at that line, you'll see that we receive all of the funding for them in the West because they're based in the West. And all of the recruitment of places funding will come from the West's budget. So essentially, I think really it would be better if I explained that on two separate lines and evened up the contribution from the growth fund and put a separate line to show an import-export adjustment due to hospital and outreach. Because essentially it'll be close to sort of the 48, 50, 52, 47, 53% of that budget that would be a contribution from the North.
Did you hear that, Kath?
Yes, I've been talking to Beth about it as we've been trying to sort this out. So
right.
Yeah, I'm aware of all of that, and it's
Sandra, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And Kath made a point about the SEND review, and that's absolutely right. I mean, we are now hopeful that it's going to come before the end of this academic year, she says. I won't promise anything nearer than that because they won't give us, but you know, the driver seems to be, from all the discussions that I've been part of, and I'm sure Kath would hopefully nod her head in the same discussion she's having, that it's going to be more and more about how to support within mainstream schools and early year settings and any other setting for early intervention, as opposed to, you know, the concentration which the government unfortunately had from the beginning on EHC plans and specialist settings. Yeah, because SEND is a very, very wide remit and we need to get it right across the piece.
Any other comments? So Paul has added a question about, could you tell us what extra capacity has been added in the last 12 months to help reduce the need for out of county?
There was a slide at the last forum, so I haven't got it to hand now, but it was presented at the last forum with the slide with all the additional places that we've put in and the ones that we are due to put in over the next academic year. So, I mean, I can bring that again. What I'm also hoping is that next time, I think the next forum's in March, that we will bring the first phase of the sufficiency data that is coming out of Mastodon, the company that we commissioned in order to look at our sufficiency and project growth figures, etc. I've seen, you know, we're starting to see some data, which is very interesting, but they've still got to put some more work around it. So I'm hoping that I'll have something to bring to the next meeting on that.
Okay, I'm just going to summarise when there are a couple of people who couldn't hear you. So we were talking about extra capacity. Gwyn was saying there was a slide at the previous meeting about what has been added over the last year, and we're starting to get some of the data through from the Mastodon, so that which was the company that we are working with to help us analyse what we need, where we need it, and what therefore we need to be planning going forward. I think so that we can meet needs. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Joe, can I just say that I think the thing is that we're increasing our capacity locally to try and prevent out of county, but the pressure on the system from below to escalate, you know, the numbers coming through to go through the system is outstripping our ability to put additional places in locally. So that means that, you know, even though we're adding an extra 10-15% places inside, that they're being used up, and we still need more out of county. So that's why, you know, we really do need to look at the whole system and see how we can better manage.
Yeah, and I think it's that the review of the system that we need in order to be able to, because Sandra's question about, do we believe that the budget allows for the local authority to take sufficient action to address that? Sandra, are you talking about, have we got enough going on to remedy the situation?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it, isn't there? Like, ultimately, have we got enough funding? Which I imagine is probably not, but anyway. And then the other part is, are we confident that the direction of the limited funds that we are budgeting for are being appropriately shared, really to try and address what Gwyn's referring to, which is a, you know, a systemic problem that we're all really responsible for trying to address. Do we feel confident that this is something that we can correct, that we can get right?
Gwyn?
I think together, yes, I am confident we're doing it, but we need to have that very open and honest conversation. And so, yes, we do need to look at how high needs funding without EHC plans, so the general high needs funding to support children, how that is distributed and whether it is distributed in the best way and whether we can do it in a different way. Now, some of that work was started before, unfortunately, the first lockdown, and COVID has sent us into a bit of a spiral since then. And so we had started it, but it all stopped. It is starting again. I'm starting some extra work with some of our units to see whether there's any way that they can support within mainstream schools and see what's happening. There's training going on at the moment, so that none of that will be, you won't see any impact of that until post-April. But, you know, there's things going on, but loads of other stuff needs to happen. And it's about having all of you involved and the wider schools network to actually have that conversation and make decisions.
And I think this needs to be a system-wide response and a system-led response, because we are the system and actually we are therefore should be key partners in leading the response, and we all should be willing to step forward and be part of that. That's my view.
Yeah, Joe, I was going to really echo that and say that actually I think the risk of kind of identifying the problem without the solution is it's ensuring that all stakeholders are able to act in a coordinated way to improve the system. I think the risk is at the moment that schools kind of act independently to try and get what they can from a shrinking pot. Special schools and alternative provision are at full capacity and may not always represent the best value for money, particularly for out of county placements. And I think the hard part is that at times the narrative can be that, you know, the blame either sits with the local authority or with schools, whereas the solution has probably got to be all of us working in a coordinated way to make best use of the funding which is available, as well as campaigning for better funded provision, I guess, from central government.
Mm-hmm. And the opportunity to learn as much as we can from what others are doing, how they are doing it. If Milton Keynes, which I'm going to go away and have a look at now, Paul, if Milton Keynes is managing something, then, you know, there are ways also of looking out as well as looking in, and that's what we've got to be able to do. Look out, look in, take the best and work together. As we said earlier, you know, these are our children, this is our system, and we have to be able to find and Kevin has said, you know, from a special school point of view, that's the end of the journey in a way, and we all need to work together, special, mainstream, the whole thing. This is a system that we are all part of, and we all have to be able to work together. System, and we have to be able to find there's me again. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, forwarding about that, then we'll take a 10-minute comfort break and we'll be back at 3:20. That's okay. Thank you very much. See you in a minute.
Could everyone make sure they turn their cameras off and mute their microphones? Thank you. Sharon, you've just rejoined while we're on a 10-minute break. So if you're wondering where everyone is, we're reconvening at 20 past and everyone's got their cameras turned off.
I keep on being thrown out, Paul. I've been thrown out about 4 or 5 times.
I think there are NCC network issues that seem to have cropped up over the weekend. So I'm going to raise a call and hopefully if enough of us do, they'll get resolved.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but when I keep on disappearing, it's just because I'm being thrown out, and the frequency of being thrown out is getting greater and greater.
Yeah. Okay.
I might go and try and find where Kathy is, because she's in the building and I don't think she's been thrown out. So I might see if the room's big enough, I might join her.
Good plan. Okay. I'll just turn your camera off and I'll see you again at 20 past.
Yeah.
Hello, Jenny. Just in case you're wondering where everyone is, we're just on the break. We're due to reconvene in 3 minutes. That's why everyone's got their cameras switched off.
Okay, that's fine. I thought it was I thought I'd just try and get in there when I could. Sorry, I'm a bit
problem
late.
at all. All right.
Before we start again, it's Wendy Brackenbury. Can I just apologise for having my camera off? I normally use my iPad, but I couldn't get in on my iPad, and I logged in on my laptop, and Zoom can't access the camera for some reason. Although I have a camera, so I don't know.
That's fine. Thank you for letting us know. I think lots of people are having that sort of trouble today.
Yeah, I think there was a change to the NCC network over the weekend that's had some unintended consequences. So a number of us are raising calls through the help desk, and hopefully that will focus minds on getting a fix.
It's any consolation, Paul. We had problems last night at East Northants as well. Some of us managed to get in and others couldn't.
It shouldn't be a consolation, but it does cheer you up when you hear you're not the only one.
But that was Teams Live, and I think Teams Live, it's always a problem when it goes live.
Okay, I'm just trying my can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I can. Excellent. All right, thanks. But then I've been able to hear everybody, so that's probably not the best judge.
Yeah, the issue seems to be that some participants can't hear anyone who's dialed in via the NCC network.
Yeah.
So I've got my own laptop and my work laptop side by side now, and just to test it, I tried joining the meeting on my own phone, and I couldn't hear NCC colleagues either.
Can't see you, Jess. Where are you?
There. Okay, if everybody who's sort of out there could be turning their video back on, please, just so that we can check that everyone's back. Kathy, can you see me now? Oh, I think you're on twice, Jess.
Yeah, you're on twice. That's what it is, Jess. Yeah. I could only see one. No, that's, yeah, lovely.
I just want to make sure the speaker works.
Thank you, Kath. Hopefully that that YouTube helps a little bit as a solution, although it is a bit delayed. Okay, so if we are now all back in the room, so to speak. If we, Beth, now have a look at the 2021-22 school budgets and the consultation proposal, and there is a vote on this.
Thank you. Paul, would you mind putting the slides up for me again? Are you there, Paul?
Oh, have we lost Paul? Oh, no, there we go.
Oh, brilliant.
You haven't lost me, I just can't multitask.
Great. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So just a bit of background about the school's budget consultation. We circulated it on the 5th of January for a quick turnaround on the 15th. Very short notice, largely due to the 17th of December being when we got the final settlement. And with the added complexity of disaggregation, really we needed to know what that settlement was going to bring before we could do the full modelling. In other years, we might have had an equally late settlement, but we would have had less sort of complications to work out. The four options we presented were around the single issue of transferring funding from the schools block to the high needs block, which we ask in most years to offset the demands. We're legally allowed to transfer up to 0.5% of the schools block to the high needs block with the schools forum voting on that with the schools forum permission. So the four options were transfer the available headroom within the high needs to high needs after schools are put on the full national funding formula. So that's the sort of the surplus, the headroom that might be available after all schools have received what the ESFA published on their website in July. Option 2, transfer that available headroom but put it into growth fund, which is essentially the do nothing option. Option 3, transfer the maximum allowable, the 0.5%, balancing that through capping the schools, which would be a cap on the per pupil increase year on year. Option 4, transfer the maximum allowable 0.5%, but by reducing the minimum funding guarantee, which is the increase per pupil year on year. The option 4 was the LA's preferred option. Next slide, please, Paul. Thank you. So the LA proposed to follow the national funding formula. We've been doing this for several years as far as it's affordable. We apply the rates that are published by the government, including the area cost adjustment, to the individual formula factors. We've then requested that we transfer the maximum allowable 0.5% of the schools block funding to the high needs block, and to balance that using the minimum funding guarantee. The growing demands and costs on high needs support, as we've talked about before, are the main reason for asking to do that. There's also a potential increased impact on the high needs block from the COVID closures and the COVID situation generally, that might increase the costs in 21-22 in the high needs. So it's believed to be a prudent approach to maximise the transfer from the high needs block to minimise creating a bigger problem in future years. So the consultation responses are shown on the next slide. Had a very poor response, 11 responses from the north and 7 from the west, but it's not really surprising given the COVID closures and the impact that's had on schools and the work they've had to do, and their focus has probably been on everything other than this, which is a very small query really to schools compared to other years. And most schools didn't actually see any change in their indicative budget under the 4 different options. So we've had option 4 has been chosen by 5 schools in the north and 4 in the west, whereas option 1 or option 1 and 2 was 6 schools in the north and 3 schools in the west. A lot of those who picked option 4 said that we're choosing this because there's no impact on our school and it's the preferred option by the LA. Next slide, please, Paul. So I've pulled out, because there were so few responses, I've been able to put all of the comments on these slides. So the North has one slide, but I think it's useful for North and West to see the questions and the responses and the comments. So the first comment was that we should only transfer the amount required, and we should seek further funding from the SOS to provide adequately for high needs. Mainstream funding shouldn't be needed to balance high needs as a principle. So I think it's always interesting to hear back from schools what the views are, and to get that two-way dialogue as we started talking about earlier.
Beth, can I ask, is that not a misunderstanding of the difference of what high needs is?
I do wonder if some schools aren't quite picking up the understanding that the funding is going back to schools. That there is. But I guess we kind of need this kind of consultation response to be able to go back and help with understanding. So it's quite useful to see.
Yeah.
So then another comment was that the data provided was incorrect, and I've put that in full because it says as yet no response has been received in respect to this query, and no response has been received. It leaves us with no alternative but to support option 1. And I have to apologise. Unfortunately, the quick turnaround of the consultation meant that any queries on census accuracy aren't able to be resolved between the response between the question and the submission. The tool that we receive from the government, the Education and Skills Funding Agency, comes pre-populated with all of the census data. So it includes academies and maintained census data. It includes all of the demographics information. So that kind of a query on where we've got census pupil numbers slightly different in the indicative budgets compared to what schools or academies are expecting. I think it doesn't detract from the fundamental question we're asking about the high needs transfer. It's more about them wanting to get an indicative figure for their budget planning, which we can do, but not within this short time frame. So then move on to there was a question regarding the rolling up of the teachers' pension grant and pay grant into the national funding formula at the value of 180 for Key Stage 1 and £265 for Key Stage 3 and 4. Can it be confirmed that any minimum per pupil funding guarantee and or capping will exclude these amounts? Can it be confirmed that these balances will be overlaid as additional grant rather than subsumed into calculations? Yes, I can confirm that the minimum per pupil funding guarantee, which is one of the 2 guarantees of funding applied to the formula, is applied after the capping and minimum funding guarantee that's based on a per pupil amount year on year. It happens after those, so it is definitely received, and that's why the government put it through that, to put the increase on the minimum per pupil funding guarantee. That's done right at the end of the sausage machine of formula process. Slide 6, please, Paul. So we've had a comment, it would be useful to gain a greater understanding. Oh, sorry, this is yours, Jo. I've put your comments in. Why some schools are losers under options 3 and 4. We've chosen the lesser of 2 evils. Both are bad for us, but not all schools, many of whom appear unaffected by either option. We do not understand why. We have chosen options 1 or 2 as we recognise the pressures that the high needs block is under. We know that we benefit from this funding. What would have happened if we had just reduced the ORPU by £1 per pupil? And I thought that's a really interesting question, so I've put that in here so that everyone can see. We've got, in option 3, I could find a clear correlation between schools that have sparsity funding receiving a cap. And I think the cap affects those that have an increased average per pupil year on year. And so because the sparsity rate has been increased for 21-22, the knock-on effect is that they're the ones who are then receiving a cap. So essentially, they're not receiving the full national funding formula. They're receiving the cap on their sparsity funding. Then for the other differences, and for option 4, it's very difficult to unpick the various parts of the formula. There is a historical relationship between those schools who've already reached the national funding formula and the minimum per pupil funding. So if they're already on the national funding formula in full, then reducing the MFG, the MFG itself, say we're increasing by 2%, that takes them above the national funding formula level. And so then if you're trying to balance it by reducing that MFG, it's only affecting those that have historically already arrived at the NFF. So it's kind of, you can't unpick one specific reason, it's just that those schools through time have reached that point sooner. And then looking at the ORPU, because that is something traditionally that we used to use to balance when we had a pot that didn't cover the full national funding formula. One of our first ports of call would be looking at reducing the ORPU. But now, because we have this added minimum per pupil funding guarantee on top, reducing the ORPU doesn't reduce the funding evenly. So by taking £1 away from the ORPU, that provides £22,000 of funding from the west and 18,000 from the north, so 40k overall, whereas you've got 106,000 pupils in the system. So you can see it doesn't sort of provide an even reduction across the schools. So that's that slide. Next slide, please, number 7. From the west, we had the comment that the 1.3 headroom is all that is available to transfer. The additional 188,000 proposed to transfer has a direct negative impact on 50 schools, with the authority overriding the guarantee. The 1.3 headroom should be rediverted to address the most urgent demands, which is within the high needs block. So I just wanted to clarify that the reduction in the MFG doesn't reduce the guaranteed per pupil amounts, though obviously it changes the guaranteed increase per pupil per year. So I've just put there the guaranteed per pupil levels that are in the formula. And the second comment from the West was, as a small school, we cannot afford to take huge cuts in budget and still offer quality education. Our children have already had their education impacted by COVID. To reduce staff and resources as they return to school would, in my opinion, be criminal. Those are the consultation responses. I just need to clarify that the 0.5% would actually be slightly less than I've put in the consultation, as it needed to be applied to the total schools block before the teacher's pension and teachers' pensions contribution grant have been rolled in. So this is showing you the difference. So the actual maximum, so the headroom that we have within the formulas are shown there in the first column. The actual allowable without the TP and TPECG being rolled in is the 1.17 and 1.44 million, and not the 1.22 and 1.5 that I've put in the consultation.
Is that on the next slide, Beth? Can you scroll? Do we need to?
Sorry, Paul, can you forward to the next slide, please? So this is just to correct that the 0.5% has to be applied to a slightly lower figure, not the final schools block funding, but the schools block funding before the pensions have been rolled, before the pensions and pay grant are rolled in. There's a slightly lower impact, but the same sort of principles. Options 1 and 2, no change. The number of schools affected in option 3 have reduced to 11 from 19 in the north, to 16 from 24 in the west. All the same schools are affected, but the reductions are slightly lower. Apart from one school, which had the highest reduction in the west at 47,000, and there was no change on that. Happy to take questions. We've got the voting slide next, but happy to take any questions.
We can just look at the voting slide and then we'll take questions and comments. So there are two options, and we would need one of them. We would need to discuss and then propose one of those options. I believe that's the case, isn't it not, Secretary? We're just voting on one of those options.
That's my understanding, yes. So it's either one or two.
So we're either voting to transfer the maximum 0.5% or we're voting to transfer the headroom.
Yeah, you could vote to not to do either of those, in which case it would be putting the headroom into the growth fund. So if you don't agree with one or two, then it would be option.
If no one proposes them, so presumably the proposal has to, someone has to propose one of these. Secretary, can I just ask what happens if someone proposes one and someone else proposes the other?
Well, we'll take a vote on both, and whichever has the most votes in favour would be the resolution that's adopted.
Thank you very much. Okay, so if we can just minimise that and come back to it in a minute so that we can see more people on screen. Thank you very much. Okay, any comments from the members? Any questions with regard to the consultation and those two proposals that are there? As I said, in response to that very first one, I think that we really need to understand that mainstream includes high needs pupils. And so we are looking at it as mainstream and special as a divide is not accurate from what I understand, because we have pupils with high needs in mainstream schools who are funded through the high needs budget. That would be correct, would it not, Gwen? Yeah.
Absolutely, about just so between, well, not quite half, just below a half of, well, probably it's about a third of young people with EHC plans are within mainstream schools and obviously funded. But then there's all the young people who have access to additional high needs funding without the need for an education, health and care plan. And that's through SEND, but also through vulnerable children, where we try to maintain those at risk of exclusion and we allocate funding that way.
I do think that comment indicates that there is work that needs to be done within the wider professional community on the understanding of the difference between, not the difference, on the understanding of the high needs budget block, and that who benefits and where it sits, and that it is not a trade-off between mainstream and, I put in my response, which you will all have seen there, thank you, Beth, but it was a public consultation. I put in my response that absolutely I will lose out by either option 3 or option 4. However, I do understand the pressures, and I do understand that my schools gain from high needs funding. So therefore, I expressed what my opinion was. So I think that there's some work to do there with understanding of the budget pots and what is funded within each. Any other comments? Any questions? Any thoughts? So Sandra says, are we looking to patch up the high needs funding issue here? We need more funding for high needs block due to demand. Should we be taking from the broad school budgets when they are already so stretched? So I guess, Sandra, the answer is, if we don't, where do we take it from?
Yeah, I understand that. I presume this is the only option. And so what I'm sort of grappling with, struggling to understand, is that the dilemma is quite great here for lots of settings, and taking aside the detail of individual cases who need the support in their settings, etc. fundamentally I'm struggling that this is a dilemma that we're facing. So take from one and give to the other, but actually we're all going to end up potentially taking from ourselves, aren't we? Because the high needs funding block is not going to be fixed forever. And I completely respect and understand that there needs to be reform around the high needs and how that is happening. I just feel like it just doesn't align with me at the moment, and that perhaps is a personal view. It just seems a little ironic that we're making this decision based on those two potential solutions. I appreciate I'm not being very helpful here, but I think it's
no. And Sandra, I absolutely see your point. I've fallen into the losers columns as well. So I think it's that understanding of what our other options are if we are going to be able to fulfill our statutory responsibilities, I would guess, and then there are those other things. So I think this comes back to what the recovery plan might be, and so what the proposed actions might be in the recovery plan if we were going to get the high needs block to be self-sustaining, as opposed to needing to be subsidised by the schools block. Gwyn, Beth, have you had any thoughts yet on how that might come into line? What might we be facing?
Well, the simplistic thing is that if we don't have enough money, the simple way is that we reduce any funding that is given out for individual pupils in order to balance the high needs budget. But that means less money goes into any of the settings, including special, to support our young people. And then schools would have exactly the same dilemma of how to meet their duties to meet the needs of all children in their setting with reduced funding. But that's the very sort of simplistic one, because we haven't had time to really look and see if we can come up with any more creative and better, and obviously work with other authorities who've had to actually issue a recovery plan and see how they've done it. I think, the overall aim of all of us is that we get our high needs allocation from government. We can do nothing about that. It is, given to us, and we need to try and work within it. And I think it's how, with wider recognition and communication across the sector, when we, especially when we move into the north and west, and understanding what that is, and that all schools understand what their impact on that is if they do not work together to meet the needs of these young people, because everybody's decision impacts on that. And I think, so it's having that understanding of what those impacts are to try and stop being in a deficit budget model. Yeah. And it's very complicated. It's absolutely not just about schools. It's not just about the local authority. It's about, the parents' perception, how they're feeling about how mainstream schools meet their child's needs and all the rest of it. So there's lots of things to consider and put in there. So unfortunately, it's not a simple answer. I mean, obviously, I would love you to vote to put over the most that you can, because then that gives me a budget that hopefully I'll be able to manage and we won't have a deficit next year, which is what I would want to do. But if you don't, and we have a deficit, we then have to do the recovery. So it's sort of, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place until we have the plan of how we're actually going to ensure that we do manage our system, the system and the systemic issues, so we can maintain ourselves within budget.
Paul has a statement here about the impact of a 47k reduction in one school having quite an impact. That is a considerable reduction in one school. John comments that both being subprime options, but not many other ideal solutions or proposal. Cara was asking me to summarise again. So the discussion, and I think presumably I'm summarising what Gwyn has said, which is that we don't have, as John says, that we don't have any prime options here. We are looking at if the funding is not there within the high needs budget, there will need to be restrictions on how the existing high needs budget is used, and that will affect both mainstream and special. It would affect across, because some of the things that we do that are not statutory, I would assume, Gwyn, are the things that will go first, because statutory is the thing that has to be protected. So I'm assuming, therefore, that some of the top-ups that schools receive for high needs pupils who do not have a statutory plan will be one of the first things that might be affected. I'm assuming that. I mean, obviously we don't have a plan, so we don't know how that, but you have to make that assumption. Statutory has to come first.
Oh, can I add, sorry,
yeah.
I think the frustration really is it's not a newly developed situation. I appreciate, as Gwyn has outlined, that demand has continued to rise and outstrip funding, but every year, every meeting, we have the same discussion. This year we had a 10 million windfall into the budget. We're putting, or we'll probably have to put more money into it, and there doesn't seem to be an end. But it's not a new problem. It's been there for a number of years. And I don't know what, you know, I'd look for more pace to be put into a solution, or at least understanding how we move forward. And I'd have hoped we'd have had that over the last 12 months, not be sat here 12 months later in exactly the same place. I think that is how I find the frustration.
And I absolutely get that, Paul, but it's not a single person or, you know, single organisation's decision. It is a whole system, and those conversations started. I actually can't remember when we had the session, Sharon. Sorry, I don't know if you're still on, whether you can remind me of when those sessions were. But we started to have those conversations, and we were starting to pull together action plans. And then obviously since March last year, things have taken a turn where those conversations, I'm sorry, have stopped. I mean, I'm not particularly happy they have, but there's been rather a lot of other things going on for absolutely everybody. And so the time spent to actually try and unpick the, thank you, Kathy, to unpick this and try and, you know, so come up with and start actioning some of the solutions. So Mastodon was the first one, and that is happening, and we're going to start getting some output from that now. And so we can start looking at sufficiency, so we can start planning ahead of what we think might be happening as far as the need for places, and planning to how we can do that locally, and indeed what those costs are, because, you know, all of this comes with costs. But the actual work that needs to be done, the systemic stuff about understanding why in this county we are increasing at the rate we're increasing, and also that we have more children moving out of mainstream into specialist provisions than most other counties in the country, and we need to understand why that is. And you know, that work needs to be done, and that needs to be done with the sector. It's not something that the local authority can do on its own. So unfortunately, you know, in these very busy times, it takes a lot of organising to try and get those conversations going, but they absolutely need to happen. I agree with you, Paul.
Yeah, can I ask a question, please?
Sorry, can I just take Sandra's question first, and then it's been sitting in the chat. So Sandra was saying, would the option to head towards the deficit model, whereby there isn't enough money, as in not to agree the LA preferred option, secure more positive outcomes in the long run? I'm assuming that what Sandra's saying is that sort of, does that send a message to the, is that what you're saying, Sandra, sending a message that there isn't enough money?
What Gwyn is describing is that we're not following a national picture with this big increase. And yes, we need to get to the bottom of why, but the need doesn't go away necessarily. I understand at grassroots there's probably more that can happen at school level, but by taking away some of that funding that would be used at grassroots potentially to prevent the need for the high needs, it's very hard to kind of to agree that we're helping ourselves by doing a what to me seems like a temporary fix. It doesn't solve anything, and perhaps having that deficit model and therefore the need to put together a recovery plan will ensure some security in terms of accountability, efficiencies, etc.
Gwyn, do you have any?
I suppose the only thing I'd say, I think it's a shame that, because I mean, it's been very visible, as Paul has said, over the years, that the high needs funding budget is under significant pressure and has been in deficit for the last 3 years. I think we managed pretty well. We were late to the party of having a deficit budget, shall we say, but we are now in that. And mind you, I have to say, I think, for the budget next year, we're moving to the 2 unitaries where we're not carrying forward a deficit for those 2 budgets. So there is a real opportunity to try and draw a line under the sand and actually work within the budget envelope that is provided for both of those authorities, however hard that's going to be. But I think, to me, it's just sad if you've got to have the DFE demanding that you do things and you look at things as a system rather than the system actually enables that process itself. I just think that would be, to me, that's a backward step, but I understand where it's coming from, Sandra.
Rob, was it you that wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to ask a couple of questions. One is that obviously the 0.5% that we're being asked to vote on is the maximum that we can allow as the schools block, and the local authority can ask for a larger amount than that at a later point if it wishes to do so. Can I just see if the local authority anticipates that they will have to come back within this next period, perhaps through until either August or even perhaps before Christmas, and ask for a further advance in regard to this? The other issue I've got is just a little bit of an issue on page 3, I think it is. Option 2, I wasn't quite sure what it was trying to say, because it says to balance this by bringing the minimum funding guarantee down from 2% in the national funding formula. Does it mean bringing the minimum funding guarantee down to 2% or down to something else from 2%?
Yeah, apologies, that was me. I left a 2 in. I was going to put the figures in for North and West, but it's just bringing it down from 2% to the balancing point.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And then the first is the to ask for subsidy.
With regards the asking the ESFA for or the minister for a higher contribution than the 0.5%, we would, if we were planning that and if we were prepared to do that, we would have brought that to Schools Forum first, and it would have to be forming part of this conversation. It doesn't look to us as though we need to do that at this point for the 21-22 budget setting, and so there are no plans to ask for higher than 0.5%. And from what I've heard at East Midlands Finance Officer Group and from conversations with ESFA colleagues, it's very rare that those are accepted, those requests.
Thank you.
Just a comment from Kath, sort of in the area of mental health, seeing significantly increased number of referrals for inpatient admission and complexity of presenting conditions, year-on-year increases, and those being out of their control. Sharon?
Thank you. I think I just wanted to support what Gwyn was saying, really, which is this isn't a local authority issue, it's a system issue. As we've said earlier and at previous school forums, this is an area where we have to work across the system. We have to be really clear about the money that we have now is allocated to individual children's packages, and that is meeting their needs set on that criteria. The money we have available, depending on the vote, would be less, and obviously that then has a consequence for how that's distributed across the piece. So it is the case that we need to look at this, but it isn't a local authority issue per se, it's actually across the whole of the system. And Gwyn's point around increasing demand is really important, because if we are increasing more than other areas, then we need to look at the relationship between children, families, schools and the local authority, because the referrals come into the local authority from schools, from children, from families, parents, etc. So it's really important in this context that we understand that that is a system-wide issue, not just a local authority issue. Furthermore, and again, Gwyn and Beth, I'm not convinced that by going into a deficit situation, as Sandra suggested, does send a clear signal that results in a different behaviour and more money coming in, because that's obviously been a situation that many of the local authorities have been in. So it's just about making sure that we're clear of the context, and that we do whatever decision is made, that obviously there's some real implications for that. Nonetheless, we do absolutely need to look at the system issues and move that conversation on. But that's a together thing, and it's not a local authority thing, and it's also about working with those parents as well.
I think that's the difficulty of the vote, isn't it? Is that the flip side of not doing that is effectively it's voting for a decrease in provision, because that inevitably is what would follow from a recovery plan.
Any other hands, any other comments? I'm just going to screen two. Paul.
Just a quick one. Really is just sometimes though, ripping the plaster off, because that's all we've been able to do is put a sticking plaster on the wound, is ripping it off, is the best way to get the long-term healing. So if you are in the deficit position, alongside a lot of other local authorities and colleagues, then the government's more likely to have to take notice. Whereas if we keep trying to put a sticking plaster on it, then it's not necessarily as apparent and visible that there is an issue that needs to be funded. That's what I was going to add. So.
Kathy.
I was just going to say, I think part of the long-term issue is waiting for the SEND review, the results of the SEND review, and how we move forward. And I don't think, I echo Sharon's feelings and Gwyn's. I absolutely agree with the sentiments that if we bear ourselves as a deficit, as a kind of statement to the government alongside other local authorities. And I would say that we were actually probably in a better position than some local authorities. We have for a number of years managed ourselves extremely well. We have just suddenly got to this position, and we could almost say we've done it. We've kind of almost begun to catch up. I don't think the government will be swayed by giving us any additional funding. And I think, they see that the review as being part of that solution, but they will be looking at the system to support us, to support the resolving of this issue. And I guess part of the plan, whether we end up with a support plan under a small deficit or a large deficit, they will be looking at the system and at all our participants here and children and families, as Sharon said, at being a party to that solution. And once we've done as much as we can along that system, then we can probably go cap in hand and say, look, we cannot do any more. And I think that's part of the challenge. But I do completely understand that sense of, well, actually, if we don't do anything, then, if the forum doesn't vote in this way, then perhaps the government will step in and give us more money, and that's not going to happen at this point in time.
Emily. Oh, sorry, I saw your hand was up. Sorry. Any other?
I think Lee's hand's up.
Oh, sorry. There we go, Lee. Sorry.
It's all right. Thanks, Joe. Beth, disappointing response rate. Yes, timings and all that aside, we just get that. I think with this sort of thing, Rob alluded to it earlier. I am the same. Like, a load of people didn't get this sort of information in order to make a informed decision, and maybe communication methods needs to be looked at to include perhaps, I don't know, academy trusts or just leadership in there as a wider thing. Because talking about my trust particularly, I was able to, very late in the day, I was able to go around the schools and get responses, and I just know a load of schools in trusts like that would look to the trust on whether they should be submitting that or not, and in that time frame, difficult. I appreciate that, but with a bit of thinking and a bit more communication, I think response rates could be achieved far better
Yeah, I do
Just by looking at
appreciate your
things,
comment. Thank you. Yeah, it's always difficult reaching the academies. We have a distribution list with the newsletter, which is the one that I took.
Yeah.
In the past, I've used the northants-ecl.gov.uk email addresses because I think officially they're meant to be the ones that schools use. But I know academies in particular and trusts don't tend to use those because they have their own. So I do always have that difficult sort of logistical issue of which email address lists do I use.
I get that, Beth. I would imagine the vast majority of schools would have received it, and that's including our schools. I just think there's a not deliberate or not, there would be a should we answer this or should the trust answer this on behalf, and etc. And I just think if there's a bit of better communication out there, you're far likely to get a better response rate, I think, if that's just put out in the open.
Yeah, point taken. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? John.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, just to follow on what Lee was saying and what others have contributed, I think really, and I know it's been really a particularly difficult year, but with my business hat on, it feels like we're doing this in a really like a reverse order, because normally what should happen is we should do the review, get the feedback, make a plan, and then vote on what we need to do. But it feels like we're obviously not in that position for lots of different reasons. But I think that just adds to the challenge of making what we all individually or collectively feel is the right decision. And I'm not sure whether that's something that we have to make a decision today, or we can go and get some more information from Gwen, from Master Don, and look at plans, or it's just there's the hole. We need to decide how we're going to fill that void.
Today's vote, I do need in order to set the schools' funding formulas to submit the individual schools' budgets to government on the 21st. I'm lucky because this year I've got 2 days in between. Normally it's the same day of schools forum is the submission day. I don't think what you're being asked to do here is to fill that whole funding gap. We're not, essentially we've got the schools block amount, there's headroom in there of about 0.4 something %. That is what we can move in without affecting the individual schools' budgets. Or do you want to contribute a bit more? That's the local authorities' aim, because our direction and aim is to try and balance the high needs overspend. That small amount of contribution, additional contribution by going up to the 0.5% maximum is really the decision. Do you want to go to the 0.4 headroom, or do you want to go to the full 0.5%? And that will then feed into me submitting the budgets, individual schools' budgets on in 2 days' time. Sorry, I've just got to go and let my son in.
So, John, I hope that, and everybody, that there is headroom, or there's the 0.5. The headroom is approximately 0.4, and the 0.5 is what's being proposed. So, you know, I think we all know what the issues are here, what it means, that there is no swift answer to this, and we are probably having the same conversation as most school fora around the country are having and have had year after year after year. And how we get that message across to central government is also a question, because the review has been delayed, the consultation rather, that has all been delayed because of COVID. We hope to get something over the next few months, but again, that can't be guaranteed, can it? Because we don't know what we're going to get, or at what speed the government will be able to work on any of these things. Sharon?
Yeah, I just wanted to also say, just back to John's point, really, we have linked with this end review. We've had a couple of individual meetings where we've talked about Northamptonshire's position. We've shared the data with regard to the growth, the fact that we have a system that is operating slightly differently in terms of the exponential growth that we've had. And we've absolutely talked as a systems leader about the pressures that we have as a local authority and the pressures we have across the estate. So please don't think that we've not been fulfilling our systems leadership role as a local authority in absolutely stressing what the issues are and indeed what the further issues will be unless we get a change around actually how we best support these children, schools and the communities that serve them. So I just wouldn't want you to think that we haven't been doing that work, but as you'll appreciate, and as Gwyn has said, it is a national issue, but we have absolutely lobbied and been part of those discussions and presented on our behalf and your behalf around the specific challenges that we've got. And I think it'd be remiss not to say that, and the work of Gwyn's team around Mastodon, etc., and that these are all the things that we have been able to do with School Forum's agreement to look at how we can agitate and support the system. The fact remains, I think, in Joe's sort of summing up, unfortunately we'll have to go very shortly for DFE call. We need to make a decision, and it's either that there are two options and there are consequences for both, and I think Beth has set those out.
Okay, if there are no other comments, that Paul. Oh, sorry, you've got your hand up on your screen. Okay. Let's just check the other screen. Sorry, I've got my laptop screen's not big enough to get you all on, so I have to toggle between two screens.
Chair, sorry, I really apologise. Can I just ask one final, very brief question? And I do apologise because I've asked a couple already today, but the other option that was put on your paper, Beth, talked about the no do nothing option, which was the growth. Can I just be clear what you're talking about when you talk about the growth fund? Are you talking about the pupil growth fund that we talked about last time at our last meeting?
Yes, that's right. So the essentially that's the only place where we could put it if we don't put it in the national funding formula.
And we voted on that last time, didn't we? For the West 0.92 million and the North 0.56 million. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, you voted on the budget that will be used to spend. Yes, that's right.
So the proposal that you put down, obviously, for us to vote on doesn't include that. So what would happen to that vote that we had previously if we vote for either the headroom to go there or the 0.5 headroom to go to high needs, or the 0.5 to go to high needs?
It essentially just becomes a bigger budget because there isn't, we don't have any other, we don't have like an ability through the formula to have a contingency. There isn't a mechanism by which the DSG can have that.
So currently that headroom is slated to go to the pupil growth fund, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
And what we're saying now is we're taking a vote to say we'll not give it to the pupil growth fund, even though we voted on that at the last forum, but we're going to either give that headroom over to high needs instead of pupil growth fund, or we'll give slightly more to the high needs fund, yeah?
Yes, so the growth fund, as we've set, will remain, and it will either have this added into it if the vote is not to put it into the high needs block. So it will become bigger, or it will stay as we voted on.
Okay, so it won't decrease that, it'll just increase from that with any headroom that's in if we didn't vote for option 1 or 2.
That's right, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, again, I know probably lots of people that probably understand that, but I didn't.
No, Rob, it's really important to get it clear that that growth fund stays because we've already voted on the growth fund.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Beth.
Changed by, well, could be changed by us not voting on anything and putting it all in the growth fund, but it would be an addition, not that money that's already there.
Yeah.
So thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so do we have any proposals from forum members with regard to this item?
Oh, I'm happy to propose the first proposal, which is a 0.5 increase to go to the high needs block.
I'll second that.
So, Chair, just to clarify, that's option 1 on the paper. That's been proposed in second, Chair. Do you want to put that to the vote?
How are we going to vote? Just so I'm aware.
Well, I can do show of hands, or I can do a roll call. Which would members prefer?
I'm happy to waive.
Okay.
Will we waive?
So all those in favour of option 1, could you please show your hand clearly until I ask you to put it down, please? Thank you. I've got 14, Chair.
Okay. All those, do we do an against for this one?
Please, yeah.
Yes, all those against.
I can see no hands against, Chair.
Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3.
I can see 3 against, Chair.
3 abstentions.
3, sorry, yes, apologies, 3 abstentions. So that's 14 for, none against, and 3 abstentions.
Okay. Is that all we need to do?
Yes, that's carried, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. A very difficult conversation, and I'm talking from someone who will lose money as having voted for it. So it is a not the easiest one for us all to have to discuss. Thank you very much. So we're just going to move on now to an update from Jess. Early Education and Childcare Service update, please, Jess.
Yes, hi, thank you, Chair. Paul, would you be able to put up my slides for me, please?
I can, there we go.
Excellent, thank you. So, thank you, Chair. I will just be updating you today on, first of all, the autumn funding 2020 and the update of North and West Early Years Single National Funding Formula. And the next steps in terms of what I'm bringing to the forum in March. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. I want to start with an update about the autumn funding. As I promised last forum, we have now finished the analysis of the data. And the data show us that we have a slight majority, which is 46%, which is 331 settings, which were actually positively impacted, which totals just over £1.2 million, which obviously has been paid in the autumn headcount. Followed on from that, we had 12%, which was 87 settings, where there was no change to headcount compared to autumn 2019. However, we do have 304 settings, which is 42%, who were negatively impacted, which totals approximately £1.7 million. So what we're doing now is that we're looking at how we can best support those settings financially who have been negatively impacted, and really want to do this fairly across the sector. As I said in the previous meeting, in the previous forum, is that I've always wanted to protect the base rate for next financial year. So what we're doing currently is work is underway to support this endeavour, and we will be in contact very, very shortly in the next few weeks with the outcome of that. So that is my update on autumn funding. I can take questions either at the end or now, whatever you prefer.
Probably easier at the end if that's okay, Jess, because can't see everything on the screen right at the moment.
No, that's fine, that's fine. So can I have the next slide, please? So as you all know, in the last forum, I was still waiting for the DSG announcement. So as you all know, the government announced that they will invest the 44 million in funding for early years education in the next financial year. And that was with a view to increase the hourly rate paid to the providers in the funded hours offers. So on the 18th of December, which, as you can appreciate, was obviously very late in the term, we received an announcement that the base rate will see an increase of 8p for the 2-year-old offer and 6p for the universal and extended entitlement. The additional supplements will remain the same, as they have not changed. And the DSG allocated has announced the allocated budget for both North and West. And there is a slight difference, as you can see, with the North of just over 22 million, and with the West with 22.5 million, just a bit above that. And the difference is because we are paying per children, and according to the headcount and data, is that we have more children in the West than we have in the North, hence the difference in rate. So, so that's obviously what we're working on at the moment. So if I can have the next slide, please, Paul. I had wanted to bring you the budget and the expenditure at this forum. However, due to some work that we're currently doing to trying to get as much base rate out to the sector as possible. So we're working through those details now, and also the details of the payment structures, as well as the overall budget positions. And I will bring them to you in the March School Forum. I appreciate that's very late in the day, and for those of you who know me know that I would have preferred it for this forum. I am so determined to protect the base rate, and in order to do that, I really wanted to have a look at the January census. Because of COVID in the autumn funding, and also because of the exceptional circumstances in how we calculated the autumn funding, I really wanted to have a look at the census, which is actually has closed as we speak this week. We do have a few settings that still haven't completed the census, and we are going back to them. The team is working very hard on this week to remind them to complete it, although being late, but I do think it's important to get that information so that we can see what the recovery in attendance have been, so that we don't come to the position throughout next financial year where we might need to look at the base rate again. So it's important that we look at the COVID impact in terms of the deprivation as well, because at the moment the deprivation is according to previous data. But I wanted to look at the January census to see if deprivation, because of families have got, there might have been an increase in families accessing the universal credit, which may mean my deprivation funding out to the sector in terms of that budget may need to increase. So that is the reason, that is what we're working on at the moment. So that was my update. So thank you.
Thank you, Jess. So if we can just close that down, if that's okay. Right. I always find early years funding a little confusing. So can I just add, if parents have not sent their children now because they are worried or whatever, that has long-term implications for budgets. Yes?
Yes. Yeah.
So that is likely to be the case, is that not?
Well, actually, we saw when we did the data for the autumn funding, is that we actually saw about 12% increase in attendance for December. Obviously, now we've got another national lockdown happening.
December on when? On?
From the month before. So actually children are, there are some parents, there are more parents who's now taking the children into early education and childcare as opposed to November. So we have already started seeing an increase.
But surely January will be quite...
Yeah. And that's where I'm a little bit cautious, and I'd rather be cautious than us then have to go back on it, is that I want to see what the January census says, because we're now under a new lockdown. Because what we need to do is, I would anticipate, please, if we are going to come out of the lockdown at some point, which hopefully in the next few weeks or months, or I can't say that.
Hopefully at some point.
I put enough in the contingency funding pot to be able to then make sure that we then don't need to touch the base rate. So the January census will be very much of a great analysis, intelligence for me to be able to make that stand, because if we were to, for example, not use the hours on the budget that the DSG has currently calculated for us in terms of the 22 million and the 25.5 million, that means that we'll have to pay something back in July. However, if the numbers go up, then I need a contingency in order for us to be able to continue paying for the adjustment to happen in July. So it's sort of a bit of a rock and a hard place.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Angela, who's always my source here of Angela.
Hi, Angela.
Oh, Angela, you're on mute.
Sorry, of course I am. Can I just ask, in terms of how much additionality did we receive from the 44 million? Because it sounds like a hell of a lot of money available, but it's got to be spread across. So in terms of the money additionality coming into the local authority, how much will that be?
We got an approximate 9% up increase in our total budget in the allocations of 6 and 8p.
Okay, so, okay. And then and this is a little aside from this, but alongside this, there was a request for a letter to go to the ESFA regarding the maintained nursery school supplementary funding, which will also impact on the budget. Has that happened?
Beth, can I leave that one for you?
Sharon may know that one.
Yeah.
Beth, any answer?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I think that's gone from Sharon and Kathy.
Okay, Kathy says she's got something to add. So Kathy.
No, so it went from Teresa.
It went from Teresa, brilliant.
Yeah. Good go.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That's really great. And then we did talk before about having a working group to be looking at some of the changes right across the sector. So I'm not just talking maintained nursery schools, I'm talking across the sector. Is that still something that you'll be looking to doing going forward?
Absolutely, Angela. That is something that we're looking at. And what I'm doing is that will come as an invite in the next few weeks, as soon as I've been able to give you some examples and some modelling for you.
Okay. And then obviously, like you said, we should hear in the next couple of weeks about the people who've been impacted negatively by the change to funding. I'm talking for myself, I can just say that January is very, very different to December. Very, and certainly Corby, where it's hitting very, very hard. We have seen dramatic drop in people attending, either through bubble closures. And you know, we're trying our utmost to still offer, where families are scared, to make sure we're dropping off home visit packs, all of those things, you know, homeschool packs to them, to keep that going, so that we can actually keep them on roll. And I don't know if everybody's doing that or how that's being thought about going forward. So I think it's also as well as some of the challenges, some of the fantastic resourceful things that people are doing during this time needs to be acknowledged as well, right across the sector.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Jess. One of the things that I've urged Jess to do this week, just on that very point, is set up some Zoom sessions with leaders from the early years settings. We've done a number with schools, and I've urged Jess to make sure that she has a number of facilitated Zoom sessions this week, that we absolutely get the sector talking about what they're doing, how they're supporting each other. So I know Jess was trying to get health colleagues along and other colleagues, but I've said, actually, if we can't get those along, Jess, I want you and the team to get them. So please out for those. And I don't know, Jess, if you've organised them yet, but they will absolutely be happening this week, and then they will be happening on a regular basis. One of the other things I wanted to think about in relation to this, and you'll appreciate this, Angela, as well, is parental behaviour and how parental behaviours changed in terms of nursery versus childminder and perceived risk. So we also wanted to make sure that we took the time to understand what was happening in the sector and how things are different, and also are they different just now or different for the long term, given people's anxieties around COVID. What I've given Jess a timeline of delivery for 18th of February to be clear around the position, looking at the census and all of the factors in play. And then I suppose my offer through this is that we can share some thoughts, as we have done previously, around options, and also take into consideration any top-up funding that might be available for those sectors that are providers that are absolutely struggling more than others. So Jess has that deadline of 18th of February. The Zoom calls will be happening this week. Absolutely want to support the sector in that way. And then we will bring it back in March and hopefully have as many pieces of the moving jigsaw as possible in order to protect the base rate, but also to understand the impact of deprivation. You'll appreciate and see that we've had a massive increase in free school meals, with the impact of COVID, etc. So for me, it was just about taking the time just to make sure that we use all the intelligence that's available to us in order to best support the sector and not be saying one thing in January to then say something else in March. So I hope that reassures. But Angela, please link with Jess on the Zoom session. We will absolutely listen and support each other in the way that we can with that regard.
Okay, thank you very much.
And if I can just say, Angela, that the emails for the invites for this week's Keeping in Touch has gone out already, so have a look in. If you haven't received the email, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. And Sandra posed a question, but Pat has very nicely answered it. So thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'm aware that we're running slightly over, so we just need to move to the final item, which is Schools Forum Plan. Secretary? Oh, mute.
Sorry, I knew I'd do that. I'll just share that now, Chair, and go through it very briefly. Okay, thank you, Chair. So Beth and I have worked together to update this. I'll skip forward over the regular items, although we don't have dates for May and beyond yet. We're hoping to have those for you by the time we get to the March meeting. We're still forming the governance structures of the new authorities. So once we've done that, we can sort out a meeting programme that means that Schools Forum dates are going to dovetail with the dates of the new authorities. And of course, there'll be 2 forums to organise as well. As is often the case, once I've published this report, I'll need to make some amendments to it. So the early years item will be slotted into March for a vote, and ditto the high needs that would have had a vote today will need to be in there as well. But other than that, members can see the programme for the year, which is not particularly different to what you would normally see. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Just check down to the bottom of my chat. No. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. We have no notified urgent business. Our next meeting is Tuesday, the 16th of March. I'm going to assume we're still meeting by Zoom.
Yes, Chair.
It'll be a whole year of Zooming by then. So thank you very much for a really intense meeting, but thank you for your contributions, everybody. And I know we now need to go to another meeting.
Yes, Chair. We've got the North and the West shadow meetings. So as soon as we're running over, shall we just go straight into the North?
Yes.
In which case, we'll hand over to Mr. Burkitt to chair. There are only 2 items on the agenda, one of which is the minutes and the other to ratify the vote. So I'll just get the minutes ready to screen share.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. We shall attempt this with ruthless efficiency if we can. So I'm assuming, Paul, that the apologies for non-attendance are the same as per the main school forum. And
Correct,
any
Chair.
membership changes to notify of for the North forum?
No, I provided a brief summary at the beginning of the meeting for the benefit of those that couldn't hear me. We've taken some steps to try and recruit PVI representatives and a 16 to 19 representative to the North. So hopefully we'll be in a position to report some progress on that before too long.
Great. And if anyone has any additional declarations of interest, then obviously if they would declare those now, either on the chat or by raising a hand.
Can you just take me off as chair?
I'll need Raj to do that. Sorry, he's the host.
Ah, yeah. Actually, Joe, and I think that is also that error is on for the main Northamptonshire minutes. I think we're both on as chair for both sets.
Apologies. Sorry, I'm with you now. I thought you meant for this Zoom meeting. Yeah, no, I'll correct that.
So, any comments on the minutes from our last meeting on the 15th of December?
Yeah, just to say, James, that's Kevin. I wasn't present at that meeting. I had to leave the main forum meeting early.
Ah, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. I'll correct that.
And that's the same for me as well. I wasn't there.
Thank you, and apologies.
And anything on content? Perfect. So if we accept those as a true and accurate record, that's great. So just on agenda item 3, then there's just one vote to ratify, which is that vote that we took on the transfer into the high needs block of 0.5%. And just to check, Paul, that what we're voting on is to ratify the vote rather than a rehearsal of the actual original vote.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I suggest again, if we do it via waved hands, and obviously this is only eligible for those who are on the North Shadow Forum. So all those in favour to ratify the vote that we took to transfer 0.5% into the high needs block.
I've got 13, Chair.
Thank you. And any against? And any abstentions?
1 abstention, Chair.
Thank you. And those other 2 votes, I think, have been pushed to the March meeting. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And I haven't been notified of any urgent business for this meeting. So in record time, probably, we can declare the North Shadow Forum meeting closed. And I'm assuming that if members only serve the North Shadow Forum, then it is our cue to disappear.
Yes, correct, Chair. And unfortunately, I've had apologies from Chair and Vice Chair of the West. So I have a sinking feeling it'll be down to me to organise that one. So thank you for North colleagues, and anyone who is both North and West or West is welcome to stay.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, colleagues. Without further delay, as I said, I've had apologies from Peter French and Vanessa Bradley, who are chair and vice chair. They've let me down at the first time of asking. I will ask if anyone wants to volunteer to chair on an interim basis just for this meeting, if anyone's interested in doing that. I suspect I knew that would be the answer. So what I'll do then is just go through the minutes as before. And while I'm getting those ready, I'll just remind members that we do have an extra item on the agenda, and that is the school's PFI item that affects only the West. So I won't be able to match James's time, I'm afraid. So those are the minutes. I think are there any corrections from any members that I need to be aware of? No, so the list of attendees hopefully is accurate, and the record of the discussion that we appointed Peter as chair, Vanessa as vice chair, adopted the terms of reference and ratified those votes. Any comments on the minutes at all? I'll stop sharing because I can't see everybody. Okay, so just on to ratifying the vote for that the Sovereign Forum has taken already, which was to transfer the maximum 0.5%. Can I have a show of hands, please, for all those in favour of ratifying that vote? You have 5, and all those against? None. Any abstentions? I have 2 abstentions, thank you. So that's carried. Okay, we have one further item of business, which is the PFI utility item. So I'm going to screen share that presentation. And I noticed that Beth is down to present this. We also got Colin on the call as well. So I am gratefully going to hand over to them.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I'll talk to the slides, and then any questions Colin's going to answer for me, because I don't have a very in-depth knowledge of the PFI scheme itself. We have 41 PFI schools in Northamptonshire, and they all fall into the West area. I've put a bit of information there on how they're funded. There's a central government contribution of approximately 9 million, 3.6 million from NCC, and the DSG itself 7.8 million. The PFI factor in the Northamptonshire schools funding formula is paid to the PFI schools in their individual schools budgets, and there are several parts to that payment. There's a utility subsidy, an affordability gap, indexation and change requests, but essentially what those schools are invoiced in the past has been what we pay to them in the formula, through the formula, so that they don't lose out. The PFI unitary charge, the contracted payment, has 2 portions to it: the debt for the main capital and infrastructure development, and the facility management FM services, including project management, insurance, life cycle works, and the FM. So the unitary charge is paid for by the schools from their ISB and NCC. Next slide, please, Paul. The utility charge issue, I don't know how many members online today are regular members, because I can't see you, and how many might be new to this issue. But in 1718, a part of the PFI contribution to schools' budgets was reduced. So the utility part of their funding formula for PFI was reduced to 50%. Following a schools forum decision. This is a schools forum decision to change these PFI payments. The reason for that was that it was felt that there could be energy saving measures that could be introduced within the schools that would then have the knock-on effect of the PFI company reducing their charge, their invoice to schools. And Colin can correct me if I'm getting the mechanism wrong. But ultimately, the progress was limited, and we found that the schools weren't able to make those savings. And so although they had a drop in funding, they weren't seeing the equal drop in invoice in the bill for the utilities. Work is continuing with the contractor and Amy to drive down that utility usage. And in 1920, again, there was no saving found. And so in October 2019, when we last discussed this, Schools Forum agreed to stage the increase back up to the original utilities cost within the school's budget, so that they don't have an additional cost that they didn't previously have under this PFI arrangement. So we increased it back up to 75% of what it was originally through their formula budgets last year, so for this year's budget, 2021, and it was always with the view that it would be increased to 100% in the 21-22 budgets. But with the nature of DSG, decisions at Schools Forum are only binding for a year, so we need to revisit this again in this year to make sure that that's still where the West Schools Forum would like to take it. Next slide, please, Paul. So what are the financial implications of increasing that utilities cost within the funding formula back up to 100%? The £75,000 increase generally within the PFI, that's through the funding formula. That's what's been funded and is given to us by the government to fund the PFI scheme. So that increase is fully funded, and that's been put through into the PFI schemes in the national funding formula for schools here. There's a £100,000 increase in the PFI contract inflation element and a £7,000 increase in inflation on the change request. Those are contractual parts that are funded that we can't change. The proposed increase, which is down to individual schools forum vote, is to increase by 191,000 back up to the original utilities funding within those schools' budgets. If we don't do that, those schools have to fund a cost that wasn't part of their PFI agreement. If we do it, then within 1 year, we have to spread that £101,000 cost across all of the schools in the West. That's how I've funded. That's how I've done my modelling, and the indicatives that I've sent out are assuming that that has been spread across the schools, that cost, and we've still got the headroom, so it's affordable within the overall pot that we have for the West. It hasn't affected the national funding formula being received by schools. So there is money within the schools block for us to do this. It won't affect the funding that your schools receive. It will be funded from the West schools block if you agree to this, and it will mean those schools don't lose out. I've added down there is a risk which Colin has explained to me, that every 5 years there's a benchmarking review in the contract. So there might be an increase to those schools if that benchmarking review does increase the costs to schools. There tends to be a lag of about a year. So the government will fund reasonable increases in PFI, but it's on an annual lagged basis. So I think I'll put more information on the next slide, Paul. So that on the last occasions for benchmarking, Colin has resisted and challenged the report, and so far that's worked and we haven't had extra to pay. So been good news so far. Whether we can still maintain that position, we'll yet to see, but we'll have to build that into part of the budget setting for 22-23 if we're not successful again. We'll update you in due course as soon as we have more information on that. So then the final slide, Paul, please, is the vote to ask whether you approve returning those utilities costs within the schools funding formula back to cover the invoice that schools will receive.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Do members have any questions on the presentation? Lee.
Just one thing, unless my maths deceives me, I'm misreading it. On the tab, there was a mention of 191,000. Those three numbers didn't add up to 191,000.
Oh no, they're separate. So slide 4, was it?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. There are 3 parts where I think it was me not explaining it clearly. There are 3 parts of the PFI costs that a school has to pay, which are unavoidable contractual increases. So they're separate.
Okay, and the 19 is the second part. Okay. Right.
Yeah, that 191 is the utilities part, which is where you can avoid it by voting against it.
Yeah, my apologies, my understanding. Okay. Secondly, is there a feeling of, the last 2 market reviews have been rejected, if you like, and hasn't gone through? Is there a view that this one's going to be any different?
I'll let Colin come in.
Yeah, so So it's a good question. So we have taken quite a commercial position with the contractor on the last 2 5-yearly reviews. Fundamentally kind of forcing them to appreciate that there's a significant cost of going through this process. Yeah. If we were to force it to market testing, which would be the next stage if we didn't accept benchmarking. And on that basis, we've kind of called their bluff to the best degrees. They're quite adamant this time around that the market has changed dramatically since the costs were benchmarked in 2005, and that and therefore there is an increased cost to the FM services. We are undertaking, and the point that Beth was making is that, so we're currently undertaking our own market assessment, which via a different kind of company that will give us what we believe the market position is. My own personal view is that I think the market's conflated. I think actually if some of the services were put out to tender, actually we might find the position hasn't really changed. But that needs to be evidenced by an independent party as well. So that's the process we're going through now. But we're just putting it on forum's radar that should that assessment come back that the market has changed, there would be an increase, that there is potential that that we would not recommend challenging the current proposal by the contractor, and that we would accept there as an increase, but obviously would then go into a further discussion about a negotiation around what the value should really be.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, just one further question. I'm taking too much time already, but in that scenario, it'd be useful to understand the scale, I guess, the sensitivity of it. Yep. If that would be useful financially. I'm struggling to see the numbers. Yeah. So in terms of the current the position that the contractors currently put forward is they would like to see an increase of roughly about £521,000 on the FM service charge. So it's quite significant across the piece of the schools. We obviously are undertaking our own review of the situation. 521,000 is probably the maximum it will be, but obviously we'd hopefully be somewhere in between two figures.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from members? No. Okay. I've just done a quick check to make sure we're quorate, because there aren't many members here, and we are just quorate. 7 members being a quorum, taking into account vacancies for the West. So if members are happy to go to the vote, would you like me to share that on screen again, or are you okay if I just read that out? And that is to vote on this element of the school's funding formula to return the utilities part of the school's funding formula for PFI to 100% of its original level. So can all those in favour please show? One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's everybody, so I shan't take abstentions and against. That's carried. There's no urgent business. Has anybody else got anything else they wish to raise? Okay, thank you for bearing with me, everybody. We'll see you on at the next meeting, which I believe is the 16th of March. Is that correct? Yeah, 16th of March 2021. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Paul.